I left my 3-month-old son with my mother-in-law for caregiving, but unfortunately, when I returned home, I found my son crying uncontrollably. In a moment of frustration, my mother-in-law hit the baby on the head, trying to calm him down. Suddenly, my son became unconscious. My husband witnessed this drama and took no action. I rushed to the hospital to save my son's life. The doctor delivered the shocking news that my son was. I was in disbelief and called the police. What happened next was totally horrific. My name is Jessica, and I'm a 38-year-old mother to my 11-year-old son, Jake. We live in Austin, Texas, and life has become a lot more peaceful for us now. But when I look back over the past decade, I realize just how turbulent things were, especially during my marriage to Mark. I want to share my story because it's important to understand how personal boundaries can shape our lives and protect those we love. Mark and I met when I was 25 and he was 27. I had just started my career at a tech firm while he worked as a real estate agent. We clicked right away, and I was drawn to his charm and ambition. I remember feeling excited about our future together. When he proposed, I couldn't believe my luck. He assured me that we would have a beautiful life together, free from the complications of living with family. Before we got married, I brought up the subject of his mother, Susan. "Mark," I said, "are we going to be living with your mom after we get married?" Mark smiled and shook his head. "No way. She loves her independence. Besides, I know how to set boundaries," he promised, and I believed him. Susan had been living alone since her husband passed away, but she seemed like a nice enough person. I thought everything would be fine. However, shortly after our wedding, things started to change. What began as seemingly harmless visits, like bringing over a homemade lasagna or some cookies, soon turned into something much more intrusive. It was just 1 month into our marriage when I first noticed it. One afternoon, Mark and I were enjoying a quiet day at home when the doorbell rang. Who could that be? I wondered aloud. Mark shrugged, and when I opened the door, there stood Susan, beaming with a pie in her hands. "Surprise. I thought you two might enjoy some dessert." "Oh, that's really sweet, Susan," I said, forcing a smile as I took the pie from her. But as the weeks went by, her visits became more frequent and longer. It wasn't just about dropping off food anymore. She started demanding meals, and even suggested we have dinner together every week. "You really should cook more often, Jessica," she said one evening as I prepared dinner. "I'd love to come over and help you with that." I remember feeling trapped. "Oh, that's okay, Susan. I've got it covered," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. But deep down, I was suffocating. I missed my space and my independence. I tried talking to Mark about it. "Honey, can you talk to your mom? I really need some space," I said one evening after a particularly long visit from Susan, where she had drunk more than a few glasses of wine and insisted on staying overnight. Mark just shrugged. "She's just trying to bond with you, Jess. It's not a big deal." But it is a big deal. "I need my privacy," I insisted. He promised he would have a talk with her, but nothing changed. Instead, Susan's unannounced visits increased. I often found myself pacing the floor, dreading the sound of the doorbell. Her constant presence made me anxious. I would be in the middle of a project for work or trying to spend quality time with Mark, and there she would be, barging in with her loud voice and overwhelming energy. The real turning point came when I discovered I was pregnant. I remember the day clearly. I was in the bathroom, staring at the little pink lines on the test. "Oh my God," I gasped, clutching the sink for support. My heart raced with excitement and fear. I had wanted this, but I also knew how much this would change everything. After sharing the news with Mark, he was over the moon. "We're going to be parents." "This is amazing," he exclaimed, pulling me into a tight embrace. But as the months passed and my pregnancy progressed, my concerns about Susan grew heavier. Feeling overwhelmed, I decided to move to my parents' house in Dallas for the last few weeks before Jake was born. My parents were excited and supportive, making sure I had everything I needed. "You'll be safe here, sweetheart," my mom said, rubbing my back. "You don't have to worry about a thing." Jake was born healthy, and the moment I held him in my arms, I felt a wave of love and protection wash over me. However, The bliss didn't last long. Just a day after I gave birth, Susan showed up at the hospital with a list of baby names. "I've thought of some great ones for you," she said, smiling widely. We've already decided on the name Jake," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But that's not fair. I should have a say in naming my grandson," she insisted, her expression shifting from joy to irritation. "Mark, can you please talk to your mom?" I said, feeling cornered. Mark looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. As we left the hospital and returned home to Austin, I hoped for some peace, but Susan's interference continued. She started dropping by every day, disrupting Jake's naps and insisting on helping with everything. Mark didn't say much, and each day, I felt more exhausted and isolated. One evening, after another long day, I finally reached my breaking point. "Mark, I can't do this anymore," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "I need you to stand up for us. This is our family." He looked taken aback, the weight of my words hanging in the air. "I'll talk to her," he promised again, but deep down, I knew this was far from over. I needed to find a way to protect my son and reclaim my independence. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. As Jake grew, my worries about Susan's presence only intensified. I was constantly on edge, anticipating her next visit and how it might disrupt our lives. Each day felt like a new battle, and I was starting to feel like a prisoner in my own home. Despite my efforts to set boundaries, it seemed like nothing I said made an impact on Susan or Mark. One sunny afternoon, Jake was peacefully napping in his crib. I had just settled down with a cup of tea, grateful for the rare moment of quiet, when the doorbell rang. My heart sank. I glanced at the clock. It was just after 3 p.m. Who could it be now? I muttered under my breath, knowing exactly who it was. I opened the door, and there stood Susan, beaming with a brightly colored bag in her hands. "Hi, Jessica. I brought over some new toys for Jake," she announced, her excitement evident. "Oh, that's nice, but I really can't right now." "Jake is sleeping," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while feeling irritation boil beneath the surface. "Nonsense. A little noise won't hurt him," she replied, walking right past me into the house. I felt a knot form in my stomach as she made her way to Jake's room. "Wait. Susan, please don't wake him," I pleaded, rushing after her. But it was too late. Susan had already opened the door, and Jake stirred awake at the sight of her. "Hi, sweetie. Grandma brought you some toys," she said, her voice too loud for the sleepy room. "Mom," I exclaimed, stepping in front of her. "Can you please be more considerate? He needs his rest." Susan's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "I'm just trying to help. You should let me take care of him once in a while, you know?" I felt my patience wearing thin. "I appreciate your help, but I need you to respect our routine," I said firmly. But Susan just brushed off my concerns with a wave of her hand. The tension in the room thickened, and I could feel my heart racing. "This isn't just about toys or visits. It's about boundaries," I said, my voice shaking. "You can't just come over whenever you want. I'm the mother here." That evening, I tried to talk to Mark about what had happened, but he seemed distant, as if he didn't want to acknowledge the problem.
"She means well, Jess."
"You just need to be nicer to her," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Nicer?" I echoed incredulously. "She's not respecting my boundaries. I'm trying to protect our son." Mark sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I'll talk to her again, but you have to be patient." That talk never happened. Days turned into weeks, and the cycle of Susan's intrusions continued. I felt increasingly isolated, and my anxiety grew. I was in a constant state of stress, feeling like I had to be on guard at all times. Mark didn't understand the impact Susan was having on our lives. I felt like I was losing control. One fateful day, everything came to a head. I had left Jake in the care of Mark and Susan for a few hours while I went to run some errands. As I returned home, I could hear Jake crying loudly from outside. My heart raced as I opened the door. "Why is he crying?" I shouted, rushing into the house. I found Susan in the living room, looking flustered, while Mark sat on the couch, seemingly unconcerned. I tried to soothe him, but nothing worked. Susan said, her voice rising. He just wouldn't stop crying. Where were you? I asked Mark, panic seeping into my voice. He's fine. I just stepped out for a second, Mark replied defensively. I rushed to Jake's room and saw my son crying in his crib, his face red and tear-streaked. Oh, baby. I scooped him up into my arms, feeling his tiny body tremble against me. What happened? Susan shrugged, but I could see her frustration growing. He was just being fussy. It happens, she said dismissively. But I felt something darker brewing inside me. I put Jake back down, and as he continued to cry, I caught sight of Susan's face. In a moment of anger and desperation, she suddenly hit him on the head, trying to get him to quiet down. Stop. What are you doing? I screamed, horrified. My heart sank as Jake's cries intensified. I rushed him to the hospital, cradling him tightly. The doctor's words later echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain, shaken baby syndrome. I felt my world shatter. How could this happen? As I stood in the sterile hospital room, watching the doctors examine my son, I realized Susan had crossed a line that could never be undone. The police were called in to investigate. Susan tried to lie, claiming Jake had fallen out of the crib, but I knew the truth. In that moment, everything changed. I was determined to protect my son at all costs. The chaos in my life had reached a breaking point, and I knew I had to take action. The hospital room felt suffocating as I sat beside Jake, watching the doctors work to assess the damage. My heart raced with worry. I couldn't shake the fear that Susan had done irreparable harm. After what felt like hours, the doctor finally came to speak with me. Your son is stable, he said, his expression serious but gentle. However, he does show signs consistent with shaken baby syndrome. We'll monitor him closely. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by anger and confusion. How could this happen? I demanded, my voice trembling. Why did she do this? The doctor didn't have answers. He simply advised me to stay close and monitor Jake's behavior. As I held him in my arms, I felt a rush of protectiveness. I would do anything to keep him safe from harm, even if that meant confronting the very person who had caused this pain. That evening, I returned home, my heart heavy with dread. I knew I needed to face Susan, but the thought of it made my stomach churn. When I walked through the door, Mark was waiting for me, looking pale and anxious. Is Jake okay? He asked, his voice shaky. He's stable, but I can't believe what happened, I said, anger bubbling inside me. Susan needs to be held accountable for what she did. Jessica, please, let's not jump to conclusions, Mark said, trying to calm me. You know she didn't mean to hurt him. Didn't mean to hurt him? I shot back. She hit our baby. You can't just excuse that behavior. My voice rose, fueled by the emotions I could no longer contain. Mark looked down, guilt washing over him. I'll talk to her. I promise. Just give me some time.
Time.
That was something I felt I no longer had. The following day, I learned that Susan had been arrested. The police had gathered enough evidence to charge her with violating Jake's safety and causing harm. My emotions were a whirlwind, relief, anger, confusion, all battling for dominance. As the days went on, the reality of the situation set in. I had to make decisions that would affect our lives forever. I met with a lawyer to discuss my options regarding custody and protection for Jake. You need to document everything, the lawyer advised. Your main priority must be Jake's safety. I nodded, feeling a sense of empowerment amidst the chaos. It was time for me to stand up and assert my independence. I needed to protect my son, no matter what it took. I returned home, determined to confront Mark about what was happening. I want a divorce, I stated bluntly, my heart pounding.
What?
Jessica, wait, he started, but I cut him off.
No.
You stood by while your mother hurt our son. You didn't protect us. My voice was steady, filled with a conviction I had never felt before. Mark's face fell, a mix of shock and despair. I didn't know it would come to this. I thought I could handle it. Well, you didn't. I shouted. You need to choose, Mark. It's either me and Jake, or your mother. In that moment, I realized the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. I could no longer afford to be silent or complacent. I was taking control of my life, even if it meant facing difficult truths. As the weeks unfolded, the court proceedings began. Susan showed little remorse, insisting it was an accident. But the evidence spoke for itself. I felt a surge of strength as I recounted the events in front of the judge, my voice firm and unwavering. "This isn't just about me," I declared, my heart racing. "It's about my son and ensuring he's safe from harm. I refuse to let anyone, especially family, jeopardize his well-being." The judge listened intently, and I could see the concern in his eyes. As the proceedings continued, I could feel the weight of the world shifting off my shoulders. I was finally standing up for myself and Jake, and it felt liberating. With Susan charged and the court case unfolding, I knew I was on the right path. I was ready to reclaim my independence and create a stable, loving environment for Jake, free from the chaos and toxicity that had engulfed our lives for far too long. But I also understood that the journey ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges I had to face alone. The court hearings dragged on, but with each passing day, I felt more empowered. I was no longer the quiet, submissive daughter-in-law. I was a mother fiercely protecting her child. Each time I stepped into that courtroom, I reminded myself of why I was fighting. Jake's safety and well-being were my top priorities, and I wouldn't let anyone jeopardize that again. After several tense weeks, the judge finally made his ruling. Susan was found guilty of child endangerment and was ordered to attend parenting classes and undergo therapy. I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Yes, she was held accountable, but the reality was that she would still be part of Mark's life, and therefore, part of Jake's life too. After the hearing, I confronted Mark outside the courtroom. "What now?" I asked, my voice firm. "Are you going to keep allowing her in our lives?" Mark looked defeated. "I don't know, Jess. I still care about my mom. But I love you and Jake too. I just thought she would change." "Change how?" I shot back. "She hasn't changed. She hit our son. I can't live in a world where she can show up whenever she pleases. It's too risky." "Maybe we can work on boundaries together," Mark suggested tentatively. "I can talk to her, make sure she understands."
Talk.
"It's not just about talking anymore, Mark. We need real boundaries." I could see the conflict in his eyes, but I knew that this was a crucial moment. "I need you to choose, Mark. This is our family now. If you want to be in Jake's life, you need to put him first." Mark nodded slowly, the weight of my words settling in. "I'll talk to her, I promise. I want to do better." I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of hope and skepticism. "That's all I can ask for. But I need you to mean it. No more excuses." Over the next few weeks, we began establishing those boundaries. Mark did talk to Susan, and to my surprise, she respected his wishes for a while. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Slowly, I started to regain control over my life, my home, and most importantly, my son. As the months passed, I focused on creating a stable and loving environment for Jake. I enrolled him in a new school, and he blossomed in the supportive atmosphere. Seeing him thrive was the best reward for my efforts. Every smile on his face reminded me why I had fought so hard. One evening, as we sat together, Jake looked up at me and asked, "Mom, why doesn't Grandma visit anymore?" I took a moment, choosing my words carefully. "Grandma is learning how to be a better person. We want to make sure everyone is safe and happy." He nodded, accepting my answer, and that filled my heart with relief. I was doing it. I was building a life free from fear and anxiety, a life where Jake could grow up without the shadow of overbearing family interference. Eventually, I decided to file for divorce. It was bittersweet, but I knew it was the right decision. Mark and I had shared good moments, but those were overshadowed by the chaos his mother had brought into our lives. After the divorce was finalized, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom wash over me. I was ready to embrace my new life, one that was solely focused on me and Jake. We moved into a cozy apartment where we could create our own memories, without any outside interference. As we sat on the couch one night, watching a movie together, I realized that I had finally reclaimed my independence. I was a mother, a strong woman who had faced adversity and come out the other side. I had set boundaries and fought for my son's safety. In that moment, I knew we were on the path to a brighter future, one filled with love, laughter, and the peace we had always deserved. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I was ready to embrace every moment.